Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 105. Today I'm talking with Dave Shade about his 200-inch Southern Ohio Giant. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone out there in Whitetail Land? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are feeling fine. As fine as we can feel with the season. At least for me, being finally over, coming to a close. I did my last sit this past weekend on Saturday here in the eastern part of the state. I know I've mentioned a couple of times the season goes a little longer than the rest of the state, so I had a couple extra weeks to try to get it done. Of course, I don't get out as much during the late season as I would like with some of the family obligations and stuff that kind of stack up on you during the course of the usual hunting season, where I typically take my vacation time and all that good stuff. But nonetheless, I did get out. I did get a few camera pictures of one of the shooter deer that was in this swamp, and so I had an idea where I thought he might be hiding. I made one last stand, or one last sit, or one last valiant effort to try to get on him. Much to no avail. So this is, quite a learning experience for me this first year in the swamp, as to how things change in there and at what times of the season it's changing. I'm not saying that this is necessarily holds true for all swamps, but at least this particular piece. I'll be interested to see next year if everything kind of holds true again. But, John and I will do a wrap up of our 2018 season where we kind of talk through what I like to refer to as the good, the bad, and the ugly, and talk about, basically analyze our past year where we made some mistakes and stuff like that. So I'll save that for, going down that path for that particular podcast. But today we have a cool show. Do want to try to get right into it. So the background on this is that there was an area in Southern Ohio that I was hunting with my buddy Chad. And this area is known for holding and having really, really big deer in the area. It's public land, but there is some lease land around it. And Chad, at one point in his life, with another buddy of his, was on a piece of lease ground that actually kind of bordered this area. And so he had a lot of history with the area in general. And then this particular piece of public, Chad had hunted for several years. And so we went to do a hunt there together. And some of the deer we had on camera were just hammers. I mean, especially for a guy like me coming from Pennsylvania, where, we were getting better and better deer every year, it seems like, but just the caliber of deer that we would get on public ground down there. I mean, we had legitimate, 150s, 160s on the camera when the year that I was hunting it. And I had seen some historical trail camera data from prior years that Chad had been hunting it. And there was, a legitimate 180 some odd inch deer. And I know it was 180 some odd inch deers because, there was a gentleman who had killed that deer we have some mutual friends. And so I knew what the score was. So, and they had pictures of that deer. So this particular piece of ground holds some hammers, and the gentleman I'm having on, Dave Shade, actually is on the lease near this piece of ground that Chad was on. He's still on it, and he happens to be the guy who killed that huge deer. That being said, this year he had an interesting story of getting on a particular deer that he ended up, something ended up happening, and he kind of talks about it a little bit to that deer particularly, and he ended up getting on another deer that was kind of a transient deer on this piece of ground, and is just a giant. It's just a hammer. It's the kind of deer that any one of us would just, you kind of daydream about being able to take. And just kind of how it all came together was really interesting. But the other interesting part of this is that I was literally hunting this piece of public ground that was bordering his lease in the general area, or in a very relatively close proximity to where both of these deer were seen and killed to a degree. So it's one of those things where maybe I had bad timing. We never had a trail camera picture of this deer, particularly on the public side. But it sounds like this guy kind of had a little bit of an interesting home range. So there's nothing to say that he wasn't where I was necessarily when I was hunting that area. But I just thought it was interesting. It's a very small community when you talk about the hunting community. This gentleman also lives, not far away from my hometown, which is kind of crazy because not many people know, Emmerich's Meat Market, which is a very small little meat shop or a little butcher shop near near where I grew up, and the fact that he knows some of those landmarks is kind of interesting. So it was interesting to talk to him because we come from a similar area, and it was interesting also because he had been hunting this deer on a piece of ground near where I was hunting, and so I kind of understood the caliber of deer that he was going after, and kind of felt like I knew him a little bit just because of some of the stories that I heard about the previous deer that he had killed. So it's a long way to say that I think this is a really cool show. I really dig the story that he tells and how he kind of got on this deer, and just the process of this year and how it all kind of went down. So with that, we'll get Dave on here in a second to kind of give us all the good deets. But I do want to make mention, I'm not sure how many of you out there listening, if you're in the tri-state area, or in around the Pennsylvania area, are headed to the Great Outdoor Show this weekend. It starts on, I believe it's February 2nd, and it runs through, I want to say, the 10th. I'll actually be there probably both weekends, so the 2nd and the 3rd, and the 9th and the 10th. And I'll be kind of hanging out at the Exodus booth, which I believe is booth 927, and then also kind of hanging at the Wicked Tree Gear booth as well, which is 932. Both of them in the Archery Hall, and of course John will be manning the Wicked Tree Gear booth as well. So if you're at the show, John will be there, of course, the full 2 weeks. So if you're at the show, make sure to swing by and say hi to him. And then over the course of the weekends, be sure to swing by and say hello to me. I'd love to get a chance to chat with any of you guys who are going to be hitting the show and trade some deer stories. But before we get Dave on, let's take care of the business end of this deal really quickly. Let's talk about our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. Simply put, the toughest saws on earth. How tough are they? Tough enough to come with a lifetime warranty. And right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get yourself a 20% discount on your Wicked purchase. Also, be sure to visit booth number 932 and check John out. Also brought to you by Exodus Outdoor Gears. I'd mentioned I'm going to be at the Exodus booth. They'll be there. They'll be exhibiting there, of course, all week at the Great American Outdoor Show. Again, that's running February 2nd through the 10th. Be sure to stop in and say hey to Chad and Jake, to all the guys at Exodus. They'll have some special show pricing as well. So if you are in the market for a camera, you'll be able to pick one up there. You'll also be able to register your new camera on the spot, so you don't have to wait to go through the registration process to lock in your 5-year warranty and your no bullshit warranty that they have as well. I know you guys, for those of you at least that have been listening to the show for a while, know that I've been using Exodus trail cameras for a long time. Like, the best testament that I can give to Exodus trail cameras overall is I still have the original trail camera that I got from them, which is now going on 3 years, I want to say. Maybe it's a little over 3 years now. So it's one of the original lift cameras, and I've literally had it in the timber from the moment that I got it till today. And the only thing that I've ever done is actually change out batteries in it every so often. And I would say that I've probably changed out batteries in that thing probably, just if I were going to average it, probably a little over once a year, not quite twice a year. I guess you could probably say in generalities, probably twice a year I change batteries in the in that camera specifically. So it's been out in every type of element you could possibly think of in terms of weather, heat, sun, rain, wind, snow, sleet, hail, whatever the case might be. And it is still, it's still rocking, and it's never hit indoors. I'm a terrible camera maintenance person, which is terrible of me, but I've never even pulled it to clean it or anything. So that's the best testament I can give to a company that stands behind their product. So when you do lock in your 5-year warranty and your no bullshit warranty, you're getting a hell of a camera. And if something ever does happen does seem to happen, you're 100% covered. But my experience has been that after 3 years of having the same camera in the woods, I've had no issues. So be sure to give them a check, ExodusOutdoorGear.com, and hit them up at the Great American Outdoor Show, as well at booth 927 in the Archery Hall. We're also brought to you by Tecumani Seed. Everything's bigger and better in Texas. If you guys are ready to do your frost seeding, now's the time to get it done. Make sure you get your seed ordered. I'm thinking that mine will probably happen at the end of February, beginning of March. I have a little bit of traveling to do in March, so I don't know that I'm going to push it. I'm going to try to wait till we get some good cold weather right before I split, because I will be heading to Iowa in March to do some shed hunting and some scouting with John to get ready for my hunting season next year. So I'm probably going to get my frost seeding done at the end of February, and I'll be using the Tecumseh seed clover this year for that to try to give the deer a little bit of something whenever when spring green up happens. We're also brought to you by Glacier Coolers, simply the world's finest. Whether you're hunting, fishing, camping, you'll enjoy smarter design, stronger construction, and superior insulation of Glacier Coolers. Visit them at glaciercoolers.com. Promo code TRUTH at checkout. Save yourself 20%. And now let's get Dave on the line. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got a fella on today, which oddly enough, he knows the actual precise hometown that I grew up in, which not very many people know of. And I kind of came upon him in a roundabout way. So there was a hammer deer that was harvested in southern Ohio in an area close to where I've hunted in the past, and he's actually friends with. We have a few mutual friends, and so this fella, Chad Sylvester, sends me this picture of this hammer deer. And he's like, "Hey, this hammer got tagged down near where we were hunting 2 years ago." I was like, "You got to be kidding me, really?" He's like, "Yeah." He told me where it was at, and it was one of those things where I was not too far away from where this all kind of took place, and so I started reading up on the story of it, and this gentleman shared a little bit about the hunt over the course of the history of this deer specifically. And I thought, I got to kind of thinking, I was like, man, I got to have this guy on because I got to hear about this story since I was so close to this area. And I'm talking about none other than Mr. Dave Shade. How you doing, man?
Thanks, Clint. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, man. So before we'll jump into all the deer stuff here in a second, but before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, just give me a little bit of a background about you, where you're from, what you do professionally, those types of things.
I live in Western Maryland, and a lot of people, when they say Maryland, you automatically think of like Baltimore, D.C., but where I live in Maryland, and you know this because you're from out in about the same area, mm-hmm. I'm in the very far western area of Maryland, right on the West Virginia border. I work in insurance. I'm an underwriter for a workers' compensation company, but most of my waking moments, I'm thinking about deer hunting. I usually don't think about insurance unless I'm actually in the middle of doing something.
I can empathize with that. That's usually what most of my day is kind of ate up with too. It's like I'm a hard worker. When I have to work, I work, but when I don't have to, I don't. If that makes sense, you know what I mean? So
yeah, and really, my work, just funds my deer hunting obsession. Is the easiest way. It's probably how my family would say. What I do for a living.
Yeah, exactly. I could probably take a severe haircut in the salary department if I just stopped deer hunting. I guess it's a pretty fair way to put it. So I do want to talk a little bit about the area that you're hunting because I'm familiar to a degree with where you're at, and so what I want to kind of start off with is I definitely want to walk through everything about this deer because I know you had all kinds of history with this guy. But before we do that, give me a sense of, or just, I guess the listeners a sense because I'm kind of familiar with it. Give the listeners a sense of the terrain and the habitat that you're hunting. Like, what's the property size, private versus public, and what the overall neighborhood's like.
And the property that I mainly hunt, I have a couple properties, but they're all in southern Ohio. Mm-hmm. And unless you've actually been to southern Ohio, it's really not like the rest of Ohio. It's I like to say it's big country. It's ridges, it's creek bottoms, it's pine thickets, it's clear cuts. There's not, other than in the river bottoms, there's not a ton of agriculture. And it's a lot like kind of where I grew up hunting here, like Western PA, Western Maryland, West Virginia. It's very similar terrain-wise. It's the farthest thing from flat kind of farmland that you can find. It's the place where I killed this deer. I'd say there's not a cornfield within maybe 5 to 10 miles. There's very little ag. It's big woods. It's for Ohio, it's big country.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there, man. That the places that I was in down in that area, it's unlike the rest of Ohio. The way I've kind of described it to people is, it's in that little area where Kentucky and West Virginia and Ohio, like they all kind of start to converge, and so you're getting a lot of the properties a lot of elements from each of those. It's like you get the crazy, I don't know. I've just never seen habitat like this when I've hunted Ohio, where it's just like so jungle thick. You know what I mean? That it's just
we have a lot of areas on our property that unless you really had on brush flows, you couldn't walk through it. It's that thick. We don't necessarily have to do, sanctuaries or anything like that because it's just so thick that it's almost impossible to hunt it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And the nice thing is that the Shawnee State Forest is kind of in the same area out there, and they do a ton of clear cutting on that as well. They really seem to manage that state forest. It's not just a lot of big open timber.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then the other part of that is just the terrain itself. Like you're getting into those like West Virginia style like mountains, or maybe not quite as maybe you wouldn't classify them as much of a mountain as you would have in West Virginia, but they are like more than a ridge, maybe less than a mountain. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's some steep country.
Yeah, the mountains aren't as big as they kind of are sort of like Western Maryland, here, but there's just as much elevation, change between a ridge top and a creek bottom, and it's just as steep. There's just a lot of terrain features, a lot of saddles, a lot of points. It's a fun place to hunt. It's not an easy place to hunt, but it's a fun place to hunt. It's a lot like kind of what I grew up hunting back here when I was a kid.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. It's definitely not an easy hunt, but I will say, like, one thing you hit on there is just like, because you have so much topography, it's like there are all kinds of hidey holes for deer to either travel through or live in that you just may not get to. You know what I mean? Just because there are so many of them. Then you add on the aspect of how much side cover they have throughout that entire area. It's just, I mean, when you see some of the deer around there and how much age they get on them, it's no surprise how they get aged, just because there's certain places they just won't get bothered. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. And it's really hard to, I hate to even use the word pattern a deer out there because you're really not. Mm-hmm. They might have some tendencies where they do something a couple times in a row, but for the most part, a lot of those mature bucks are almost nomads, and it's hard to really get an idea of where they're going to show up or when they're going to show up.
Right.
And if you can find something that they've done a couple times in a row, then you better be ready to jump on it.
Right. So I know that you killed this specific deer. I think it was December 30th, but I want to talk just a little bit about patterning, because you bring up an interesting topic, just because, Chad and I were kind of talking about this, and I know, Jeff Sturgis has hunted this area as well. And one thing we kind of started talking about was patterns, and trying to figure out, like, because there's food everywhere. So there's no real bed to food pattern per se, other than like there's a clear cut, which is kind of, which would be nature's kind of, food plot, if you will. And what we started talking about, like, is, do they have a pattern, and are they just much longer lines of pattern, or do they not really have patterns in general? So I guess if we're talking about rut specifically, have you been able to see any type of like rotation between doe bedding areas that you could start to pull together a pattern, or is it just literally nomadic kind of moving in those areas?
This is just my experience, that I can see travel corridors that bucks use during the rut. Mm-hmm. Now, to say that one particular buck is going to use this corridor at any time, that's a tough one. But there's certain corridors they use during the rut that kind of stay the same every year. Mm-hmm. As far as, these bucks, they range a long way, and you're right about, it's really hard to see any kind of bed to food. And this particular buck, and I'll go into this a little later, I kind of got a piece of information that gave me that information, that told me where he was at, where he was feeding at night. And that's sort of what brought it all full circle for me.
That's interesting. So let me ask you, just as we're kind of continuing to level set here, like, have you seen any, I guess, let me ask it this way. Is there a preferred kind of terrain feature or topography feature that you like to focus on in this kind of area? Is there one thing that you found that kind of produces more so than others? Like, for example, I know that a lot of whenever I was out in that region, I was focusing a lot on saddles, just because I was trying to get into places where deer were going to probably try to find the path of least resistance to move from one place to the next. But I'm just curious if those were places that were hot for you, or if it was some other type of terrain feature that you've kind of honed in on.
Yeah, one of my best stands is a saddle that connects two pine thickets, and what I've learned over the years is they just the saddle kind of linear. They don't just cross through right, from one side to the other. They even the turkeys walk it the same way. It's funny that they cross the saddle at an angle. And every animal that comes through there, even coyotes, they all cross the saddle in the same point. But saddles are great. I found like ridge, like out at the point of a ridge where a ridge chops off. They seem to love to cross right there on those points. That's always been a really good spot. But I try to stay, creek bottoms out there are full of sign, but they're kind of a fool's gold. They're hard to hunt. The wind's swirling. I found a lot of success hunting about maybe 70, 80 yards up the side hill out of the creek bottom. That seems to be where most of the travel happens. So yeah, that's some of the terrain features that I've, just hit or miss over the last 10 years I've been hunting out there.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty consistent with like some of the things that I've heard from some other cats and some of the stuff that I've experienced as well. I know that those creek bottoms, man, they'll get tore up. You know what I mean? And a lot of times that sign's laid down at night too. You know what I mean? So it's I think you're right there with it's a little bit of fool's gold in those situations. And I think getting a little bit of elevation too can kind of help you get into an area that you're getting a little bit more steady wind. You can probably a little bit better play the thermal game a little bit more consistently and a little bit better too. Whenever you're not sitting, near a body of water that's going to be helping to dictate your thermals and so forth as well. So, all right, man. I think with that, man, I want to kind of start jumping into the history of this deer and start to kind of piece this thing together. So I know that you have a lot of history of this guy. So when was the first time this deer showed up? And, overall, how long have you been following this deer for?
So this particular property, I own part of it and we lease it. And the whole thing together is probably about 1,400 acres, Clint, which it sounds big, but I'll be honest with you, it's hard to even hold a buck. I mean, they're going to leave your property at some point.
Right.
We first picked up this property in 2014. So this has been the fifth year we've had it. And this deer was on camera the very first year that we had the lease. Matt Klein, who you mentioned earlier, I think you know Matt.
Yep.
He actually got the first year he got pictures of this deer. And we have a shed off of him from 2014. He was about a 149 point. I only have one side of his shed, so I kind of had to estimate, about what he was.
Right.
I think he was 3.5, but he could have been 4.5 that year. Again, pretty much it's 5 years and all the pictures have kind of disappeared. And at that point, he really wasn't a target buck for anybody, so nobody paid a lot of attention to him. But that was the earliest pictures of him in 2014.
And so his age, we would then kind of guesstimate his age probably be around 8.5 or 9.5, right? Is that what we're thinking? He's either 3.5 or 4.5, in 14.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm leaning toward 8.5. His jawbone, his teeth were really smooth. And I killed another nice buck out there in 15. His teeth still, you could feel the ridges, and he was a mature deer. This deer's jawbone was a lot more worn down than that. Now I'm eventually going to send a tooth out and see, but I'm leaning toward 8.5 for him.
Okay, I mean that's in the deer woods, man. At anything that gets over 4.5, I mean that's a nice mature animal. You know what I mean? So,
oh yeah, and he and we'll go ahead and I'll give you the whole kind of story on it as we go.
Okay, cool. So I know that I saw some video of this deer. I know you got to creep up ninja style on him too and caught some video of him, which was pretty interesting. I want to talk to you about that in a second. But was this deer? Did you, through the course of the years? I know you were capturing him on camera and stuff like that. But did you see him a lot on the hoof, or was he mainly a camera deer for the most part?
He was mainly a camera deer, and honestly, Clint, he was never on my cameras. I was usually hunting a different part of the lease after a different buck. And this deer was really never on my radar at all until this year. But so we first saw him in 14, and I think as the story goes, Matt actually had an opportunity at him with his bow in 14, but it was a limb in the way or something like that. In 2015, I don't know of any pictures of him, but in kind of the the loose club we have, there was nobody really hunting any of his areas that we later come to find out his main areas.
Mm-hmm.
And when he showed back up in 2016 on the very northern part of the lease, he was just a giant in 2016. He may have even been a little bigger than he is now.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty special deer then, because he's a hammer this year. You know what I'm saying? That was
the times look longer in 16. I don't know if he has quite the mass, but he might have actually been a little higher scoring in 2016. And in 2016, another member, Jason, mainly hunted, and he had him on the very northern part of the lease, and he just had a I really thought he would kill him that year. He had a daylight scrape videos of him, pictures of him, and I think he actually had a picture. I think he had him at about 30 yards one evening, and it was just low light, and he didn't have a shot, and he ended up shooting a different deer the week he was out there. So, really he had one opportunity, but after he tagged out, then that deer, nobody else was even out in that area.
Right. So what time of year was he most visible? I mean, did he have kind of a curtain time, so to speak? Because I've had a couple deer, especially mature deer, that I could almost set my watch to it, where he would show up in the summer, and then you would hit mid-October, he would disappear and be nocturnal from that point forward, and then like clockwork, right after Christmas, he would turn back on, and you would start to see him like right at last light again. Did this guy was he visible during the day, or was he kind of a night walker? What was his deal?
He was a little bit of everything. We never got him. I think we only had one picture of him in velvet in 5 years. Okay. I really don't know where his summer range was at. I think it was to the east. I think that's where he stayed in the summer, off our property. He would always show up sometime around mid to late October, and we would always get him. The first pictures would always come from the far northeastern part of the lease, and then as the fall went on, his range would move more to the west and more into a big pine thicket is really where I think he spent the majority of his time. And there was the last 2 years, another guy in the lease was really hunting hard over in that pine thicket. And I really thought that's where this deer would end up meeting his demise. I really thought he would get him in there. He had there was a little island of hardwoods in the middle of this pine thicket, and it just looked like a great setup. And, I think over the last 2 years, he's had just thousands of pictures of this deer in there, but it was just one of those spots that was just really hard to get in and out of without the deer knowing you were hunting it.
And that's always the spot where a nice mature buck wants to live too. That's if someone was trying to kill you, that's how you'd set up your bedroom, right? It's that you want to see everyone coming and going. So
yeah, and I think for the most part, and this is just speculation, but I think he bedded above that so he could see anybody coming in there to hunt it. I think there was just too many pictures of him when nobody was there, as opposed to when somebody was hunting it.
Right. So how did you guys go about kind of whittling down where his core area might be? Because it sounds like he's shifting around the property. It sounded like he might even be summering somewhere else, and then he's showing up late summer, early fall.
And he would always disappear about New Year's. Every year, I don't know that we ever got a picture of him after like New Year's Day. And I always wondered if he was just an early shedder, or was he moving back to his summer range. But I don't know of any pictures we ever got of this deer after like January 1st. I think he just, I don't know where he would go. I don't know if his range was getting bigger because it wasn't consistent people running cameras or hunting in those spots. So I don't know if he was in there and just nobody was hunting it, or whenever they were in there with cameras up, then it became kind of his home range, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It sounds like you get the perfect.
We have 1,400 acres. There's 6 of us that hunt it. I kind of run the lease, and low pressure is what it's all about. And so there's a lot of places that there's just a lot of places for these deer to avoid us. is what it comes down to.
Right. So let's talk about that for just a second. Like, how do you guys, when you have a group of guys, I mean, do you guys have like a set of guidelines that you guys are following in terms of, because I know you took a really nice deer in 15 too. So are you guys following some type of guidelines you've all agreed to that it's got to be this many points or scoring on the hoof around this, around this score for in order for a take, or do you guys have something set up like that?
We do. We and it's funny because it sounds low. We have a 130 minute.
Yeah.
But most of the guys that are in this lease are serious enough that really anything under 150 is probably getting a free pass.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just to keep the pressure low enough that, there's always, and it's kind of the perfect storm. Mm-hmm. We always have nice enough bucks to chase that the good 3.5s and 4.5s don't get a lot of pressure on them. And I think I kind of alluded that earlier, that when he was, like a 149 point, he really wasn't anybody's target buck, not
right.
at all. There was 5 or 6 other deer that completely dwarfed him on the property that he probably never got a second look from anybody, and that's why we don't have any pictures of him.
Right. Right.
So it's a great situation. That every year that we seem to have some really good deer on the lease to chase, and I think you were going to ask me about hunting this deer, and honestly, I was hunting a completely different deer this year. This buck was not on my radar at all to hunt. It really wasn't in a spot in the lease that I ever went. I was hunting a deer who was about a 10 point, and with some non-typical points, it probably would have went into the 180s.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really the deer I was hunting, and I actually had an opportunity at him opening day, and I didn't take the shot. But that was the deer I was hunting. This deer was not even on my radar at the beginning of the year.
So why wasn't he on your radar? Was it just that because he was so inconsistent that it wasn't, there wasn't any great intel on him to really try to put a hunt on for him, or why? I guess why wasn't the target?
And I had only ever gotten him on my cameras a couple times, and the only place that I'd ever gotten him was in the very bottom of this big deep hollow that is bordered by a clear cut. And I'd had a camera down in there at the end of 17 season, and I started picking him up down in here, and it's almost, you hear the term box canyon, and it almost is. It's just you go down in the bottom of this hollow and it drops straight down, and but I think he was using this one clear cut some, and I started picking up some pictures of him there last year, but it was a spot that you really, for the most part, it would have been impossible to hunt. There's no way to get, to hunt that spot. But that was really the only place I ever picked him up on camera. I picked him up a couple times at, one of my regular spots in the saddle, but just, rarely, maybe one place a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. It's like this guy was kind of a ghost and was getting a free pass for a lot of years, just because of the way he kind of came and went on your property, which is kind of interesting. I know I was reading where you said, you finally kind of picked this guy up on a camera, and it was outside of like the usual places that he would frequent overall. Do you have any idea like what made him kind of change his? I know we were talking earlier that these patterns in this particular area aren't real steadfast, but it sounds like he had a couple haunts that he liked to hang out then, and then all of a sudden he kind of shifted it, changed it up a little bit. Do you know why he was not showing up, in those particular places, and why he started showing up somewhere new? Was there a little bit more pressure than maybe he was used to, or was there, a really good acorn mass this year that was making him kind of shift where he was spending his time?
So the spot I eventually picked him up, I think, was a spot he actually probably used, but nobody ever was in there. But I think that over the years, it's probably a spot that he's used quite a bit. And, you referred to the video I took of him the day in the rain. So when I was out there, I was out there for 10 days in the rut, and the other deer I was hunting had kind of completely disappeared on me. So just one day in the pouring down rain, I thought, well, I'm just going to take a little scouting trip. And I'd looked at this area on the map a little bit, and I walked up in there, and to be honest with you, there's really no sign at all. It's just kind of a big open ridge. It kind of comes down to like a little bottleneck, and then it drops off. Down over the backside, there's a bench with a lot of greenbriers, and I hiked up in there, and I thought, well, I'd like to check this spot out. It looked really intriguing on the map. So I went up in there, and just it was just blind luck that I just happened to be kind of walking out this ridge and just pouring down rain. And I look up and I see this big rack coming at me, and I didn't have my bow or anything with me, so I just kind of hunkered down beside a tree and pulled out my iPhone and tried to start videoing him. And that's almost right exactly where I ended up killing him.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and eventually he spooks and goes back down over. So after that, then I went ahead and I got a camera up in there, and then I started picking him up some in that area. Mm-hmm. But the only times I would ever get him now, and this was kind of an outlier when I videoed, but that was November. I don't know what the date was on that video. November 11th, November 12th. That was the rut, and I think that was about 11 o'clock in the morning when he come walking up that point. After I put the camera up, and I would get him in there only around daylight, usually an hour before daylight to right at daylight. That was the only times I ever got him in that spot.
Interesting. So whenever I saw the video, and that was, so two-part question. That video was killer. I had a hard time seeing the deer at first, and then when you saw him, because he blended in so well, and then whenever you saw him move his head, it was just bone everywhere. You know what I mean? I'm curious, the rain, it sounds like, really kind of helped you. One, like, of course, we know scouting or checking cameras is always good in the rain because it keeps your scent down. You can be a little quieter and stuff like that. So how much of that do you think kind of played a part in being able to kind of get on him, and then ultimately, like, you put eyes on him, so then it became, well, he's got to be spending time here, which helped you kind of like make your plan. And then when he saw you and blew out of there, was there a part of you that thought, like, man, like, I just blew it, like, that's it, like, he's gone, like, a mature deer sees a human?
I'll answer that part. No, actually, I was stoked because I thought this was a spot I could kill this deer on top of this ridge. And I always kind of thought he had to be crossing that ridge somewhere, because where I was getting him back around in that canyon, there's that bench kind of wraps back around there. It's 500 or 600 yards, but it wraps back around there to where I was getting him on camera in late 17. So I kind of had a feeling that he had to be crossing this ridge somewhere. But if you walk the ridge, it just looks the same. But once I got a video of him, no, I was excited. I thought, no, this is a spot I might be able to kill this deer, and maybe not this year, but maybe next year, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of look long term at it, but no, I was excited. And what was the first part of the question again?
So it was how much do you think, it being wet that day played into your ability to kind of get there, see him, and then that, sounds like that, visual on the hoof.
I think it played.
What's that? Go ahead.
What's that?
No, I was going to say, sorry. Go ahead.
I think it played a giant role in it, because I don't think if it had been a dry day, number one, I probably would have been in the stand. I probably wouldn't have been out walking. And I don't think there's any way I would have walked up on him. And he probably knew, pouring down rain, he was up moving around. So I think it played a tremendous role in it, that I ended up walking up on him in that pouring down rain.
Right. I think it's interesting that, a lot of folks, when they bump a deer, especially a mature buck, they think it's kind of game over. And I kind of fell under that same philosophy or same way of thinking too. And I was actually talking to, a buddy of mine, this fellow, Zach Farrenball. Most people listen to this, I'm sure, know who he is. He's from the hunting public. And we were talking just about, gathering intel and scouting, because he scouts like a madman. Like, he scouts, for every day he hunts, the dude probably scouts 3 or 4 days. That's just how he operates. And he gets on good deer, and he kills good deer, and does it on really hard to hunt places, typically. And the one thing he was kind of telling me, and I never thought of it this way, and it's interesting that you said it also, was that he was like, I don't want to necessarily blow deer out of somewhere. That's not really my goal, whenever I'm scouting or whatever. He was like, but he was like, I'm also not completely distraught when I do. He was like, because one, he's like, I think they can take more pressure than we give them credit for. He's like, I don't think they see you and then they're hunting to the next county. He's like, and he's like, seeing them on the hoof, he's like, is the best intel you can get. He's there. He lives there. You know what I mean? So then it's just a matter of backing out, letting him get comfortable, and then getting back into to try to put a hunt on for him. Which I think it sounds like that's exactly what you did. You got there, you saw him, you bumped him, which, you know, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. But now at least you knew where he was at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you hit it on the head. It's sort of the long game. If I was planning on hunting that ridge, I wouldn't have been up in there bouncing around, you know, walking around in mid-November. But I think that was the last day or the second to last day I was going to be out there, and then I had to come back and go back to work for a while. So I knew that, you know, I wasn't going to be in there for minimum, you know, 2-3 weeks at a minimum. So, you know, I agree. Now, if I was actively hunting that area, I wouldn't be out, you know, walking around in the middle of the day looking. But yeah, I kind of, just like he said, you kind of look at it like the long game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after you saw him and you had 2 to 3 weeks to get back, how bad? What was your ability to focus on work those 3 weeks?
Well, so the other deer that I was actually hunting had showed back up.
Oh.
So I kind of switched gears again, and I was like, well, you know, this is the deer I've been after, and I have stands up in his core areas, and I don't even have a stand up out here where I saw this deer. So I kind of went back to hunting him. Unfortunately, another lease member on the first day of gun season wounded him. And so that kind of threw a wrench into, you know, me hunting him. Now I picked him back up on camera, the wounded deer, a couple times. And I thought, well, if I can get back out and maybe hunt him, and cause his leg was broke, he looked in bad shape. And I thought, you know, if somebody doesn't get him, he's probably not going to make it.
Right.
I had a picture of him December 14th. He looked really bad. December 18th, I got him. He shed both his antlers, still dragging his front leg around, and then he's disappeared since. So I think that deer's probably died. He shed his antlers somewhere.
Right.
Once he disappeared, then that's when I really flipped over to, okay, now I think I'm going to really think about hunting this deer. You know, I was getting pictures of him, like I told you, on that ridge top every, you know, like 5th or 6th day. So, and this is the kind of stuff that, you know, it's just, it's just kind of blind luck. I hate to say that, but I was talking to a neighbor that has a property that adjoins ours.
Mm-hmm.
And, he had a little food plot behind his house, winter wheat and some turnips, had a feeder up. He doesn't do a lot of deer hunting, but he mentioned to me that they'd been getting pictures of a big buck with a drop tine down there at night in their little food plot behind their house. So all of a sudden, then everything fell into place. Then I said, okay, that's where he's at night. Here's where he's coming back up. He's crossing this ridge in the mornings, and he's coming back down in here to bed. So all of a sudden, then I have my pattern. Then it's just like you said. I have my feed to bed pattern. Now, he wasn't doing it every day by any stretch. It was, like I said, it was every 5th, 6th day I might get him. But I had enough of a pattern that all of a sudden I was like, okay, this is about as good a pattern as you get out in Southern Ohio.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree there. Was there any type of, like, looking back on like the trail camera pictures and stuff that you have of him, was there any type of, you know, wind pattern that you started to see come together once you started kind of like looking at it again with, like, after you had all the puzzle pieces, and you know, was there anything that you in hindsight were like, man, I really overlooked this aspect, you know, like something with the wind or something with a moon phase or anything like that?
You know, I've looked back and I've tried to kind of figure some of that out, and I haven't really figured anything out. The ridge I ended up hunting him on sort of runs like north-south. So I set up to the south, and I'll get into kind of how I set my stand up in a second, but I wanted to make sure that, you know, really the only wind I couldn't hunt that stand would have been a south wind. Okay. Any other wind I could have, from where I knew he was at and where I had a pretty good idea within 20, 30 yards where he was crossing this ridge. You know, the only wind that really would have been bad for me would have been a south wind to hunting.
Interesting. All right, so you got your final puzzle piece, and now, So from the time that you got that intel, how long was it until you were able to get back after him?
So, I make a ton of trips out to Ohio every year, and I'm probably out there. It's about 5 hours, but I'm out there more weekends than I'm not.
Right.
And really, this weekend I went out. It was, kind of the weekend right before New Year's Eve, and I went out on a Friday, and I decided I was going to hunt that deer. And really, to be honest with you, I was sort of really just set up to hunt the muzzleloader the next week. That was kind of what I was doing. It was really more of a setup week, so I could go back out next week and hunt a few days of muzzleloader. So when I found out that other piece of information, I slid in there on that Friday evening, and I went in right at dark. And again, that's probably not something you would want to do, but I was only ever getting pictures of him there right at daylight. So I didn't think he was anywhere close to where I, being in there. So, it was just by the time I got there. So I got my stand up, and I knew it was just a big open ridge. So I had already kind of was thinking about it. I'm either going to have to really go high, or I'm going to have to find some cover. Mm-hmm. And it just turned out that I found a tree that was next to a cedar tree. So I took my my lone wolf and my sticks, and I got tucked. And even when I got in the stand that morning, I had to break branches just because they were hitting me in the face when I sat down. So I got as tight into that cedar tree as I could get. But I got out there Friday, and I got that stand up, and I hadn't had any pictures of him since December the 26th. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't, like I said, I knew he was coming through there, but to say I had any kind of, I'm going to sit in the stand, he's going to walk by. Yeah, nothing like that.
Right. What was your access like into this location? I mean, were you, did you have pretty good access to start, or was there anything that you had to kind of do that was different to kind of make sure that you're entering it and exiting it clean?
So when I kind of found out where he was feeding at night, that made a big difference, because now it was still a long walk. I had about a mile walk into where I wanted to hunt, but it was all ridge top, and it was mostly ridge top, and there was some logging roads, so it really wasn't a bad walk. So I came in with the wind that morning, the wind in my favor, in my face, about a mile walk, and there was so a completely different direction than he was coming from. He was coming sort of from the east, and crossing that north-south ridge and going toward the west. And I came in from the south, and like I said, that was my access. And then it sounds better in hindsight that I kind of knew where he was feeding. Now, it could have been anywhere that morning, but right. I didn't see anything coming in that morning. That was a perfect access.
Right. All right, so now we have all of our puzzle pieces. You've got good access. You got your stand up. I guess first I actually want to ask this. Maybe you mentioned this and maybe I missed it. And if I did, I apologize. But was there any type of specific terrain feature there you were getting your setup in? Like, were you in a saddle in that particular area? Was there some type of pinch point or funnel that was kind of pushing him through a specific area, or was it that broader saddle that you were talking about that they like whether it was a coyote or a deer were all kind of angling through?
There really wasn't a terrain feature here, other than the ridge it kind of came out, and the ridge it was almost shaped kind of like a water bottle, where it came out and then it got a little thinner, and then it started to drop off, and he liked to cross right at the edge where that point would drop off, and it dropped off. It didn't drop off very far, it just dropped off to the next little part of the ridge, but there was some green briars and some rocks, and it seemed like he liked to cross right where he could have that cover to his downwind side. So that was where he would cross with those green briars, and he'd cross that part of the ridge. But again, I had shed hunted out there over the years, and I've been out there before. There's really no sign. You'd see a buck of this size and you think, oh, there's going to be signpost rubs and scrapes. There really wasn't. I think it was really just kind of a travel corridor, where he was crossing that ridge and going back down on that other bench to bed.
Right. Now, have you seen that before out there with the, I mean, because of course, to mention again, it's like I'm familiar with the area that you're hunting in, and like the deer density, at least in my experience, wasn't crazy, but the deer you would see were legit. And I kind of saw the same thing in those places I was hunting. Like I just didn't see a ton of crazy sign, even though I had good trail camera pictures of big deer. But is that kind of common, for your lease, what you're seeing, or are you used to seeing more like heavy sign laid down by those mature deer?
It's really common. You see a lot. I see a lot more scrapes than I ever see rubs. Now we see some tremendous like signpost rubs, but other than like some clusters of rubs, like maybe around one of the food plots or something, we don't see a ton of rubs. Now you see it, we'll get a lot of scrapes, and sometimes we'll get a lot of different bucks and scrapes that we get, at the food plots and stuff. But no, I see the exact same thing.
Okay.
If you walked out that ridge, you wouldn't have any idea that there was a 200-inch deer crossing that ridge.
Right. You would think a deer that size would make a little bit of sign. You would think, but yeah.
And really, that's what me seeing him. That was the biggest piece in the puzzle.
Right.
Actually seeing him.
Right. All right. So now we're at the day of the hunt. Like now, walk us through the hunt from like the morning. Like give us all the details as to what happened. So you got up, you were walking in, you had your access in. You mentioned you had the wind in your face. You get up into the stand, and like what are you kind of thinking once you get into the stand? What are your thoughts?
So I put the stand up Friday evening. Saturday, I wanted to hunt it, and I didn't. I just said no. I'm going to stay out of there for a day. And like I said, I hadn't got him on camera. Saturday night was the college semifinal games, Alabama and Oklahoma, and I stayed up really late watching that football game. Mm-hmm. So when I got up Sunday morning, I was kind of dragging. I was, I should have got a better night's sleep. But I got out there and I was in good time. The leaves were crunchy, and I remember walking in and kind of thinking that, wow, it's really loud coming in. I think the wind was out of the northwest that morning, just very light. So I had a perfect wind. And I'll be honest with you, I got up in the stand and, for the first hour of daylight, I didn't see anything. And by about 8 o'clock, and I had to drive back home that day. So I really was only planning on hunting until about 10 o'clock, and then I was going to have to drive back home. So by 8 o'clock, I was kind of like, I really don't know if I'm going to, if I was going to see this deer, I would have saw him right around daylight. So by 8 o'clock, I was kind of thinking, yeah, that's probably just not going to happen today.
Right. So, okay. So now you're sitting there and you're kind of questioning. It's like, all right, is this really going to go down or not? And then when was like, did you hear him first? Did you see him first? Like, what was the first kind of like notice of like hearing some deer, and what was your thought process there?
So the leaves were sort of crunchy early, and then as the morning kind of warmed up, it was just kind of wet and quiet. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I saw was his rack. So, the stand, I was tight in against a cedar tree. I was right over on the edge of the ridge where I could look down in the hollow to the east. And the first thing I looked up and I saw movement, and the movement I saw was his antlers. That was the first thing I saw was his rack. And as soon as I saw it, I knew what deer it was. And Clint, it almost looked fake. It almost looked big for his head. That was how I described it to somebody when I got back. It was something else.
Right. All right. So now you got a visual of him. Like, some guys, get a little shook, especially seeing a deer that size, and it's like no one would blame anyone for that. And then there's other folks, I know that they almost go into like predator mode where it's like they still have control of everything, but it's just they turn into a machine at that point till the kill shot. What's your thought process now that you're seeing him? Like, was he approaching where you were positioned well for, well, let me back up for a second. When he was coming in, when you first saw him, was he coming with the wind in his face? Was he cutting the wind to his back? 'Cause I'm always curious with mature deer how they're traveling with the wind, because some guys will talk about they see him often with the wind to their back, and then some guys religiously believe it should be directly in their face. And other guys, like to cut the pie, so to speak, and kind of they like to have a crosswind. So what was this deer doing in terms of wind?
He was coming up he was down when I first saw him. He was down over off the ridge, and he was on his way up to cross the ridge where where I'd gotten a picture of him crossing. He was sort of crosswind. The wind was out of the north, and he was heading to the west. So he had the wind kind of blowing across him, but the wind was in my favor.
Okay.
And the most important thing is this was the first time I had ever hunted this spot. It was the first time that anybody ever hunted out of this tree. So, it was completely first time in for hunting that spot. And I think that was a big thing of it. So when I first spotted him, I saw him, and he was probably about 50 yards away, and he down the hollow, and he kind of stopped and looked up. But like I said, I was so tight in against that cedar tree that, I just sat real still, and I knew he couldn't see me. Mm-hmm. And I made the decision. That's where I'm going to shoot him. I'm not even going to wait for him to come up and cross the ridge where he normally crosses. I'm just going to take the first good shot that I have. And he's with a spike. Funny enough, but that's the other deer that was with him, was a spike.
All right. So you're getting ready to take the shot. You're waiting for your first best shot opportunity. What's kind of going through your mind at this point? Or are you talking yourself through your shot sequence, or are you just kind of, biding your time? Did you have enough cover to get drawn clean without possibly him busting you? Did you have a little bit of cover around you that was keeping you kind of safe? What was the deal there?
I did. And you said earlier about kind of what happened. And I remember this specifically. I remember taking 3 deep breaths and counting to 3, and just when I first saw him before he got into range, to really take deep breaths and calm myself down. And then once that happened, it was kind of just like you said, it was you kind of go into predator mode. And I remember, picking the spot and just him coming up and kind of stopping perfect. I didn't have to stop him. He kind of was part way up as he was coming up the ridge, and he kind of stopped, and he was looking up on the ridge, not looking at me, but he was looking across the ridge. And that's when I took my shot at him. And I thought, I'll be honest with you, I thought I missed him. It just didn't sound like the sound when you hit a deer.
Right.
And then he took off and went about 80 yards and died within sight of the stand.
Nice. So, so how far was the shot again?
About 35 yards.
About 35 yards. And was he broadside? Was he quartering toward?
He would have been. He'd have been really close to broadside, because he was still down in the hollow enough, and I was turned where he hadn't come up onto the ridge yet to cross, but he was kind of looping around that way.
Okay. And so when you released the arrow and it just didn't sound right to you, and you saw him take off running, and of course he piled up not far away, so you didn't have to wait long, but what was your initial thought when you thought you might have missed?
It just happened so fast. And then by the time I had thought, did I miss? He was already dead. So all of a sudden he's down there, he's down there in the death run, kind of rolling around. And I was like, well, yeah, I got him.
Must have got him.
It was a perfect clean shot, and I hit him, just behind the shoulder. And, so yeah, it was just a different. It wasn't the usual thunk that you hear when you hit a deer.
Right.
I'm not sure why or what the deal was. It was the sound that really threw me off, because it didn't sound like the normal hit.
Right. So now you've seen him drop. Right, you've seen him fall. Let me ask this question first. Before you were able to get your hands on him, like with trail camera pictures and stuff like that, I mean, he looks like a giant, looks like a hammer. But did you think that he was going to be a 200-inch deer with the encounter you had with him, what you'd seen on trail camera, or were you not sure?
Yeah, I had dissected those photos. I don't know how many times with some buddies, and he actually ended up being a little bit bigger. Another buddy of mine, Josh, we just scored him over trail cam pictures, and we kept coming up with between like 205 and 210. So yeah, but you never know until you walk up to them. But and this deer just in person, it's even better than in the pictures. Yeah.
So now that he's down, right, and you're in the stand still, like you realize he went down. Now, what's your next thought? You just killed a giant. What are you thinking?
I the first thought was I want to get down there and see him. The area I was hunting, I had no cell phone service, so there was no texting, there was no calling, there was nothing like that.
Right.
The first thing I thought was I want to get down there and make sure he's dead and get a good look at him. So he was dead. I saw him, more than probably 2 or 3 minutes, and I was down, and he only died about 80 yards from the stand.
Right. So now you're packing him out, you're getting him out of there. When you first got some cell service, who was the first person you called?
I think the first person I texted was the guy in the lease, Jason, who had a lot of history with him, in 2016 and 17, who had all the scrape pictures of him. So he was the first one that I texted, and then I started texting everybody else. But the picture just the people that knew the deer and had history with them, that was the first ones I texted.
Right. And how was the party that night?
It was such a long day,
right,
because I get him out, and then I drove all the way back here to Maryland, and then I processed him that night and got him skinned out. So by Sunday night at 11:30, I was done. And I stayed up too late the night before watching that football game. So the real celebration probably didn't begin until like New Year's Eve day.
Well, that's a good way to do it then. So, what do you think? It's an awesome story, man. I mean, just this deer just kind of being a little bit of a nomad. Some of your buddies seeing him, maybe having a shot at him, not having like a real good beat on him, as far as like he's just kind of a ghost to a degree, comes and goes, and then all of a sudden you get that last piece of intel and you get on him right away. It's just such a cool story. What do you think the main key was for you to kill this buck? Like, if you had to just boil it down to one thing and say, like, I did this one thing the right way, and that's why I ended up killing this deer, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing is, and you hear it a lot, is first time in. I think these bigger bucks pattern guys way more than we have any idea. And I think that like I said, I slid in there with the lone wolf and got the stand up and slid back in and hunted it. And he had no idea that I was anywhere in the area. And I think that's key. And you just never know. If I'd have hunted that day and not seen him, would he have smelled me later that day where I walked in? Would he have maybe got a whiff of something? Would another deer spook? So it just seems like first time in. And I think, the last 3 bucks I've killed in Ohio, 2 have been the first sit, and the other one was my second sit in that stand. So I think it's really a key of keeping your stand sites fresh, and when you kind of see a pattern, be ready to jump on it.
Right. All right. So now with that, man, like what's the plan for next year, man? You got a hammer deer, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you top that one? Do you go all Don Higgins and go next year and try to get 2 in 1 week, or what?
I haven't even thought about that. I know that, the one I killed back in 15 that was, 180s typical. I thought then, I was like, this is the deer of a lifetime.
Right.
But that's such a special area out there that, the top end out there is over 200.
Yeah.
But killing one is unbelievable. I don't know. I really don't know. I'd like to get on another big one. I think the genetics are there to really grow some incredible deer, and kind of how we're doing it with low pressure. These deer are getting into the upper age classes.
Mm-hmm.
Something funny about this deer, I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, or you might have saw it, but, I mentioned at 6.5, this deer might have been a little bigger than he is right now. Last year's deer in 16, in 17, he lost probably 30 or 40 inches of antler. He was really just mainframe 9 last year with some points off the bases, but he didn't have the flyers or the drop tines or anything. And then he blew back up in 18. And I don't know that I've ever seen that before, where a deer is really big, over 216, probably loses 30 inches in 17, and then jumps back up. And of course, last year we all thought, oh, he's going downhill. What a shame that nobody got him at his peak. But he really bounced back this year.
That's interesting because I hunted out in that area in 17, and we had some big deer on camera hunting public ground. We had some that were in the 50s and 160s, and for public ground, I mean those are great deer. You're right. I mean that area is just special as far as like the top end deer that you can grow in that particular part of Ohio. But what I had heard, because when we got out there, we actually kind of got skunked. Like I saw a couple bucks, but just no shooters, and we didn't see a ton of deer. And then we ended up getting word through the grapevine that there was a bout of EHD in that area, and some there were a handful of folks who were finding dead deer. And so I was kind of wondering if our hunt, like some of those deer we had on camera that just vanished out of thin air, not even that we didn't see him on the hoof, but like we just never picked him up on cameras again. And then we had quite a few cameras out. And then if he kind of went down by almost 30 inches that year too, I'm wondering if he might have been fighting something off and then came back the following year.
That very well could have been. And there was, I don't know. I know my other farm in my other county, I had a really bad EHD kill in 17. I think down where we hunt, I heard it was a lot worse down toward the river. Mm-hmm. That could very well be. I hadn't thought of that.
Interesting.
And also, I know, and just kind of after I killed it, it all kind of, come out, but there was probably 6 or 7 guys that were getting pictures had gotten pictures of this deer this year. He was on a lot of cameras out there this year on our lease and also some of the neighbors.
Interesting. So what was his, what did he, I mean, he's a hell of a deer regardless, but I'm just curious, what was his final score?
So the final green score that we just got put on by, a guy with the Ohio Big Buck Club was he grossed 212 and an eighth, and, he's going to net right about 205, 206. Now he had about a 6-inch flyer off his, G2 that he broke off when he's death run.
Oh man.
And it's a fresh break. Now I can't say 100% that he had it when I shot him, but I'm 90% sure he did. And I went back out again to look for it, and there's a rock there where he died with a chip out of the rock, and I know that's the rock that he hit his rack on. And I know that point has to be laying there somewhere. So the rule is if it's a perfect match, you can count it. Mm-hmm. So maybe if I can find that might be another, 5-6 inches onto it.
Right. Man, that's a great deer, buddy. Congratulations, number one. Great story. Love hearing it, and I really love the place that you're hunting, because it's a challenging place to hunt. It's not for the faint of heart. It's some gnarly country out there. They grow big deer in that area, and man, just congrats. I hope you have a continued success in that area, and I hope we get to talk more again soon.
Yeah, Clint, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed just kind of telling the story. It's a testament, to the deer and kind of his legacy. So he was a great deer, and I'm glad to tell the story.
That's right, man. I appreciate you coming on, buddy. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Clint.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to, of course, thank Dave for joining us, and thank all of you for continuing to listen and giving us your support. We're super appreciative always of that. Be sure to head over to the Great American Outdoor Show if you are in the area, and holler at your boy here. I'll be at the Exodus booth on the 2nd and 3rd, and probably the 9th and the 10th, and John will be at the Wicked Tree booth the entire 2 weeks. So, and that is booth 927 for Exodus and 932 for Wicked Tree gear. Also, if you haven't been over to iTunes and subscribed to the podcast yet, we'd be super appreciative if you would be able to do that and leave us a 5-star rating. That would be super rad and super helpful to the show as we move into 2019. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Trophy Ridge, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
It takes a special knowing to colorful damaged heads, broken letters, rationalize yourself in numbers, but I